Hey there, my name's Cole Nutter. I'm a graduate student at the University of Wyoming, and I'm going to share with you some details about a project I did over the last 2 years with Ivorian refugees in Ghana. Most of my work has been concerned with community development. This has included doing nonprofit work here in the United States, as well as doing work in Namibia for my Peace Corps service. When I got out of Peace Corps, I wanted to use my skills for something that was going to be important in the future. And to me, the most pressing issue we had was the refugee crisis. Ghana is particularly open to hosting refugees and has hosted a number of refugees from all over the region for years. Some of these refugees are from Cote d'Ivoire, and in fact, since 2011, a great deal of them have been from there. I did my research with refugees from Cote d'Ivoire in Ghana on gender projects and the development project used in these camps. Specifically, I did research at the Ejikrom camp in the central region of the state. Why is this important? Well, when you work in development and when you read research about development, you learn quickly that gender projects and livelihood self-reliance projects both are necessary for the success of development projects. Increasingly, development projects are used in place of humanitarian aid. This means in refugee contexts, where there would typically be direct aid, there is now oftentimes livelihood projects and self-reliance projects. Gender policies under these conditions often break down. People have attributed this to power hierarchies and a lack of negotiation with refugees themselves, specifically refugee women, but no one's really looked directly at if the refugee values, the gender-oriented refugee values, are congruent with the gender-oriented policies of these development projects. So I mobilized some conflict management techniques used here in the States for energy and natural resources in the refugee context in Ejikrom for this research. So what exactly did I do? Well, I went to Ghana, ate some wonderful food, saw some beautiful architecture, and asked people working within the Ghana refugee regime the following things. How does the development component of the refugee management interact with gender-sensitive policies? Are the gender-oriented attitudes expressed by the refugees congruent with the management policies? Are these interacting project dynamics impactful in addressing the unique needs of women, girls, men, and boys? Ultimately, I'll argue that self-reliance livelihood projects interact with gender projects all the time. They're almost inextricably tied to each other. However, the gender-oriented attitudes of refugees did match up with the gender-oriented policies of the management teams. Unfortunately, because so much of this relies on livelihood and self-reliance projects that don't tend to succeed fully, the refugees can't meet their basic needs, and therefore they can't meet their unique gendered needs. I want to contextualize the refugee experience. I have a lot of words on this page. The big ones are the ones that are supposed to stick out at you as often affecting the lives of refugees. But in a more basic sense, as refugees leave their homes or wherever the conflict is that's forced them out of their homes, they become asylum seekers. As asylum seekers, they're part of a larger flow of immigration. And as a part of this larger flow of immigration, they have to negotiate with other state officials in order to affirm their status as refugees. Once they've done that, depending on the state, they have a few options. They can stay in that state and integrate. They can stay in that state in a settlement or a camp or some sort of containment facility, or they can be repatriated to a third state, which is a rare option, but especially in Ghana, in my experience, an option that refugees prefer. My research was primarily concerned with settlements and containment centers, so places where refugees were kept under state control. When they're kept under the state control, as these Ivorian refugees were in Ghana and Ejikrom, they're subjected to camp management policy. And this policy is dictated by funding sources which start at the state but also go to the international level, like the UNHCR or the EU or USA, primarily the UNHCR in this case. The UNHCR promotes humanitarian principles, self-reliance principles, livelihood projects, as well as the gender projects we talked about, but they have a great influence over what policies and what decisions are made in any one camp. An important part of these development policy frameworks is the protection of the unique needs of women, girls, men, and boys. I have a picture here of one of the many handbooks that the UNHCR uses to guide different nonprofits and faith based organizations and camp management teams. Women have been disproportionately impacted by adverse situations like conflict or displacement. On top of this, interactions of age, race, sexuality, gender, and class shift the way different people interact with different world systems. Under displacement contexts, gender shifts. So, a man who might have traditionally been a breadwinner might not be able to have a job, or a woman who might have traditionally been taking care of the children might now have to find a job to help support the whole family. Under settlement conditions, development policies are imposed on these people. These policies impose certain gender dynamics that may conflict with those traditional dynamics that have been changed under the displacement circumstances. Specifically, when I refer to the unique needs of women, girls, men, and boys, I'm using language designed by the United Nations and used by the United Nations High Commission for Refugees and affiliates. This language is promoting equality and empowerment among women, providing adequate reproductive and sexual health care services, combating sexual and gender based violence, recognizing facilities offering leadership opportunities for women. This is a really relevant one to stop on because this doesn't just mean finding areas for women who are refugees. This also means including women in all areas of operations for the UNHCR itself. That means at management levels as well as in the camp itself, finding ways to promote empowerment among women. This also happens within the school system with boys and girls. The last three are considering the impact of displacement on men's gender roles and identities and relations, engaging men and boys as partners in gender equality, and promoting gender equal forms of masculinity. Engaging men with gender equality is a key to making sure that you have a sustainable gender practice. Ghana has a unique context for refugee management. It's categorized as a low income earning state. And you can see here in these pictures I've provided where the rural and the urban interact with each other directly. Because of this, you have a difficult time for people to necessarily find jobs outside of the informal economy. This means refugees as well as local Ghanaians themselves. This is why oftentimes refugees go to settlements where they get subsidies from the state in the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. This slide depicts the power hierarchy under which Ivorian refugees live. As you can see, funding flows from the UNHCR and the state down to nonprofit, faith-based organizations and management groups working with Ivorian refugees in the Ejikrom camp. While I was in Ghana, I was able to speak with people from every level of this hierarchy, including the nonprofits and faith-based organizations working with refugees, camp management teams, refugees themselves, and officials at the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. Because I want to protect my participants' identities so that they're not stigmatized or seen as going against the groups that they work for or work under, the rest of my slides won't show you any of these officials, but rather pictures of the context in which these people lived. By networking with the United Nations High Commission for Refugees as well as the State Refugee Board, I was able to get permission to speak with refugees as well as management teams. Through snowball sampling, I conducted semi-structured interviews, participant observation, and took field notes on different oriented gender roles and gender policies as expressed by refugees and refugee management teams. I coded these based on the broader literature about development as well as gender, and I looked at the local context to find consistent themes that related to this broader literature. I want to now share the results of my research. My first question was, how does the development component of refugee management interact with gender-sensitive policies? This happens in a number of ways. Healthcare services are key to protecting the sexual and reproductive rights of women. The healthcare services in Ghana for refugees are the same as state healthcare services. However, this doesn't mean that refugees can afford everything. When they can't afford treatment or they can't afford medication, they're asked to debt finance these treatments and medications as a part of their self-reliance. Education is a key to empowerment for boys and girls, especially. They're taught together in these different specific livelihood classes that teach them about gender equality and gender forms of masculinity and gendered forms of femininity and how you can alter the way you think about these things. And they do games together to kind of promote gender equality and empowerment among all groups. But this only lasts through primary school. After primary school, parents are asked to rely on their own self-reliance, their own livelihoods to finance school fees, books, and food for students. These livelihood projects are a key to everything. They promote empowerment among women. They also promote self-reliance among everyone. Um, they're key to people being able to finance their healthcare. They're key to people being able to finance their education and just meet their basic needs. Other projects outside of livelihood projects, education and health, are eligibility interviews when refugees first arrive that separate men and women so as to avoid stigma or fear of retribution for admitting to some fault that happened during the transfer from conflict to asylum. After this, there's continuous monitoring and counseling for both groups. Sexual and gender-based violence is protected by the state or um, it's supposed to be protected by the state. And then cash infusions for vulnerable people are primarily given to women. My next question was, are the gender-oriented attitudes expressed by the refugees congruent with management policy? In the end, they really were. For the most part, refugees' gender-oriented values matched the gender-oriented policy aims of refugee management teams. The main takeaway from this is that both groups agreed that equal opportunities for livelihood projects as well as amenities should be available to both groups, whether men or women, boys or girls, and that these specific opportunities tend to be gendered. That is, men may prefer different employment than women do, boys may like different games than girls do. The answer to this final question is perhaps the biggest takeaway from my project. But before we get into it, I want to talk a little bit about this picture I have here. This picture is a picture of the actual refugee board in Ghana, the institution where people concerned with protecting refugees work. Despite the fact that most Ghanaians and international workers working with the Refugee Board of the United Nations High Commission for Refugees really do want to protect refugees, refugees feel as though their voices aren't heard oftentimes. They feel as though they're not protected by state officials, and they feel like language barriers, stigmatization, corruption, and their inability to leave the camps prevent them from actually getting the help they need. To this end, my final question was, are these intersecting project dynamics impactful in addressing the unique needs of women, girls, men, and boys? Because of all the reasons I just said, self-reliance projects don't succeed. Because gender projects are so tied to these self-reliance projects, when the self-reliance projects don't succeed in meeting the basic needs of refugees, the gendered projects, or meeting the unique gendered needs of refugees, also don't succeed. This is exacerbated when aid is reduced to promote these livelihood projects. So in the case of Educhrome, food aid was reduced in 2015 in place of livelihood projects, or rather livelihood projects replaced the food aid. Refugees can't afford healthcare to protect their unique gendered needs, health needs, and education systems become unaffordable after primary school. Finally, the sexual and gender-based violence that occurs to refugees isn't actually addressed by local authorities as expressed by refugees. Ghana truly is a unique refugee context. The state is very open to integration, and refugees have a lot of options there. Based on the conclusions toward the interactions of gender projects and self-reliance livelihood projects that we've just spoken about, I see two ways forward in the Ivorian context in Ghana. Either refugees can be given more aid until they're able to economically integrate, or management teams should focus on cultural integration. The tools I used for this project were developed from conflict management projects here in the United States. Using these conflict management projects, to check if refugees have in fact been consulted and their points of view have been considered when policies were created may in fact increase the viability of development projects, making them more effective rather than reducing their effectiveness. Throughout this project, I've been really lucky because I've been able to broaden my international experience, which I had some of, but it was difficult having a network that was fully based on my skills and my abilities. And this really offered me the opportunity to do that. I've been able to do more international research than I've ever done before. And this is going to really broaden not just my international networks, but my local networks. These skills are invaluable in pushing me forward to what I want to do and where I want to be for the future. I want to specifically thank the Senator Malcolm Wallop Civic Engagement Program, the Tucker Foundation, and the Center for Global Studies. The University of Wyoming offers this unique opportunity for students to travel internationally, and often this is a one-in-a-lifetime opportunity. For me, I've been able to build a career off of these foundations and use them to forward that career, especially throughout graduate school. This is beyond lucky. And I understand, especially for someone from Wyoming and the Rocky Mountain West, how rare the opportunities I've had have been.